Welcome to Jordan. Welcome to Jordan. Welcome to Jordan. I bet you I heard welcome to Jordan over 100 times from the locals during my 2 weeks in Jordan last fall. And my Jordan trip was part of this epic. I went to 4 countries, Morocco, Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. And out of all 4 of them, Jordan was my favorite. So if you're like, oh, I don't think I can go to the Middle East. If you're thinking Jordan and the Middle East, ooh, Kit, too scary. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. I was like you once upon a time. I'm going to change your mind on that today. Instead of thinking scary, I want you to think Indiana Jones and Petra. I want you to think Lawrence of Arabia and Wadi Rum, which, by the way, was my favorite. I want you to come in with this mindset because we've got it all wrong, folks. Keep your mind open until you hear today's episode, and you'll find out why not only do I recommend you go to Jordan, I think you got to move it up the list. It's a great country to visit, and the people are so warm and welcoming. My friend Sherry Ott from Ott's World told me that Jordan, out of all the countries she's been to, and she's like been everywhere, I'm like 90 countries or something, Jordan was the most friendly of all countries. I have to agree. So welcome to Jordan, and let's get started. So in today's episode, we're going to cover my 2-week adventure in Jordan. We're going to learn where Jordan is it safe for you to travel solo? I was there solo half the time. I'll be able to tell you my experiences there. There are some fabulous adventure opportunities there, including hiking and camping out in the desert like a Bedouin. It was absolutely so cool. We'll visit some of the key tourist attractions. We'll float in the Dead Sea. In short, we're just going to have a grand adventure. So once again, welcome to Jordan. When I landed in the Amman airport, the capital city of Jordan, I wasn't as twitchy as I was when I first entered the Middle East about 6 weeks prior. So I was feeling a little bit comfortable, and I was starting my trip in Jordan on a tour. I was supposed to be met at the airport, and I get there, and nobody's there. And I'm like, all right. So one of the drivers waiting for another guest from a different company was kind enough to let me use his phone to reach out to my tour company, who assured me, no, don't worry about it. Just hang out in front of the Starbucks. We'll be there in just a few minutes to pick you up. I was like, phew. That was nice. The people were very nice to let me use his phone. Complete stranger. So anyhow, that was the start of my journey. I get to the hotel, which is quite nice, in downtown Amman, and I've been traveling all morning. I was wanting to go someplace for lunch. So I asked at the front desk where they recommend I go for lunch, and they said, oh, definitely go to Hasham, which was located about a mile or so downhill in the historic district. He tells me to just keep going downhill, and eventually I'll get down to the historic district. Sounds easy enough. However, I'm a little bit unnerved because the drivers in the Middle East are a little bit crazy. And you'll hear more about this, I'm sure, as the story goes on. You know, they just kind of do what they want to do. Lines are just kind of an idea, but you observe them or not. Stop signs, observe them or not. So the scariest part that day was just crossing the street to get onto the main side so that I would enter into the historical area. On my way down, I see a sign in one of the windows saying, visitors welcome to this gallery that was not like an art gallery. It was more like a studio. And so I said, well, what the hell? They said visitors welcome. So I walk in, and these 2 gentlemen are sitting there having tea, and they could tell I'm a tourist because I stand out like a sore thumb. And so they asked where I was from, and we start chatting. They invite me for tea, and we just have a nice little conversation. They want to know, how did North Carolina get its name? I was like, I have no clue. I'll need to look that up. And so we find out all about that. And so we have a nice little thing. And they concurred that Hashim was the place to go for lunch. And they asked me first, would I like to see the mosaics upstairs? I was like, oh, okay, here's the pitch, like the Turkish rugs. I go up there. It was not a pitch. It was just so I could see how they make the mosaics. They didn't offer me a business card. They didn't offer to sell me anything. I was like, oh, that's different. I've not seen that in most places I've been to. So I was like, kudos to them. So I bid my adieus and I head down to the restaurant, and I get there, and it's probably like 1:30 in the afternoon, and the place is hopping. I mean, it is packed. I never saw so many people trying to eat. Just unbelievable. And just waiters and trays and people and wait lists and all that. And so I finally get a table. I think the menu was on the board in Arabic, so that did me no good. And my waiter couldn't speak English, but he did say vegetarian. And I didn't know if I was saying, yes, I'm vegetarian, or I want vegetarian. I just nodded my head, and whatever came in, that's what I ordered. And I had platters upon platters of food. It was all delicious, more than twice what I could possibly eat. I didn't know how much it's going to cost. I get the bill. It's 3 dinars, which was less than $5. I couldn't believe it. And so I also felt bad hanging out at this table, taking up a table, and the place was so crowded. So I did indicate to one of the head guys that I wouldn't mind sharing. And so another woman traveling solo ended up joining me at the table. So that was nice to have a little conversation. And she'd been there a little bit longer than me. And so that was a nice little exchange. And so after lunch, I headed back up and just kind of chilled out. Traveling is a little bit tiring. So anyway, so I just had the buffet at night and got a good night's rest. The next morning, I meet my tour group. I can already tell instantly I'm going to like these people. I find on these adventure travel tours that you're already pre-selected to be like-minded, and so I always meet some really, really cool people on these trips, and generally make at least one new lifelong friend. But before I go further, let me just back up just a minute. I want to tell you why I chose Jordan in the first place. So maybe a year before I went on this trip, I get an email from this company that announces a hiking trip in Jordan where the leader of the tour is going to be the very first Arab woman to do the 7 summits. And the 7 summits is the highest peaks in each continent. And I was like, she's a badass. And also to be an Arab woman to do it, when I'm sure that's not normal for women to go hiking there, I said, I want to meet her. So I signed up for the trip. And that was the impetus of this whole Mideastern adventure, that I was in the Middle East for 2 months because it was kind of expensive to get there. I was like, as long as I'm going to get there, I'm just going to bang out the Middle East while I'm there. And so that's what I did. And then about a month before my departure, I find out that the trip's been canceled because they didn't have enough people. I was like, oh boy, what am I going to do? And I had travel insurance, so I could have got my money back. But I was like, I built this whole trip around Jordan, and out of all the countries, that's the place I've most wanted to go to. So fortunately, I was interviewing Margaret, who you heard on the Antarctica trip, and she happened to be going to Jordan right before I was going. And so she introduced me to a company called Explore. And fortunately, they did have a space available. So I was able to go the following week on the exact same trip that she did. And boy, am I glad I did, because I had a great, great adventure. So off we go. And our first stop is Wadi Rum, which frankly, I didn't even know what that was. Wadi Rum translates in English to Valley of the Moon. And that's a great name for it. It is otherworldly and spectacular. Wadi Rum first became known to the outside world from the movie Lawrence of Arabia. And this is where Lawrence of Arabia actually lived. So it's this huge, huge desert valley where you have these granite outcroppings, which kind of remind me of Uluru or Ayers Rock in Australia. And just these cliffs, and they just jut out of the flat desert sand, and they're just spectacular. And like I said, so we have a small group. There's just 5 of us. There's a couple. Everybody's from England except for me because the company is England-based. And so we have one married couple, a solo guy, and a solo gal, and myself. And our guide, Saleh, who is great. And then the camps where we stayed are run by the local Bedouin people, and they were great too. So anyway, so we get to Wadi Rum and we begin our hike, and it's just jaw-droppingly beautiful. I want you to go to the website today to look at these photos and just remember, it's like 1/10 of the actual beauty because the cameras just can't capture it. They can't capture the light. They can't capture the scale. These were just magnificent. And the thing of it is this area is so vast that even though there was hundreds of other tourists out there, most of them were on the ATVs because a lot of people can't hike, or they might have been on donkeys or horses or something. We hardly ever saw them, because we're all just scattered like roaches out in this vast desert. And this is not something you can go do by yourself. You need to have a guide because there's no trail markers and it's easy to get lost. So you want to go with somebody that knows what they're doing. So we end up that night in this horseshoe canyon. And like I said, it was just our Bedouin tents and this rock cliff. We're surrounded by these cliffs that were just so tall and just unbelievably beautiful. And our tents, I want to tell you about that. So these are in the traditional Bedouin style. They're made it's a woven cloth of the 2 main animals of the Bedouins, the sheep. So the white little stripes in it is from the sheep hair, the sheep's wool, and the black is from the goats, because that's what you're going to see a lot of. You're going to see a lot of goats, a lot of sheep, and my favorite, the little donkeys that are used for transport. And so you have these square tents, and you think, this tent's not going to be very nice. Inside, we had Persian rugs, so we weren't tracking the sand into our beds. We had these nice, comfortable cots. And even at night, we had access to an electric light in our tent. So it was definitely glamping. And like I said, we had, in our eyes, we could see nobody else. So it was like our little group had the entire desert to ourselves. There was no light pollution. So when the stars came out, the stars came out. Beautiful. I don't know how Ahmed always managed to get a fire going because there's very little vegetation out there, but he always found kindling. So every breakfast we had a campfire going to cook our breakfast, and dinner as well as when we'd have a picnic. There was always a fire so we could brew some tea, always mint tea. Take that back, not always mint tea, sometimes sage tea, but always delicious. And in our campsite, they made a nice little seating area around the campfire that was really nice. And then they had these bench-like areas that a lot of the Bedouins would sleep out under the stars each night, but we were welcome to if we wanted to. That was a possibility. Wadi Rum was magical. Our campsite, spectacular. And I felt blessed to have 2 nights there. I was like, if this is the way that Jordan's going to be, I'm going to love Jordan. So the next day, again, we're doing the hiking. And even though you're like, oh, it's more rock, every turn, every corner was just breathtakingly beautiful. And the time of year that we went, I was there in October, was perfect. So it was warm during the day, but I didn't find it overly hot. And the nights were cool. Because in the desert, remember, once that sun goes down, all that heat can dissipate. So you can't go there year round. In the summertime, it's going to be way too hot. And the wintertime, it's actually going to be way too cold. So the times to go are March through May to catch that spring season. And then it cools down enough that you can go starting again in September through November. So I got there right in the sweet spot of fall. Jordan has been building its tourism industry for about the last 20 years. And the Jordanians realize now that this is like one of their most important industries because Jordan does not have oil. They have phosphate. So phosphate's their main export. They got the short straw when it came to the Middle East oil bounty. And so they are also more stable than a lot of the countries there. They act as a peacemaker in many ways. And when we get to the Dead Sea section, I'll tell you a little bit about that. I found them to be very family-oriented and very much the live and let live philosophy. Those that I met just want peace in the Middle East so people can just get on with their lives and have a nice, well, it's the same thing I see with most people I meet across the world. They just want their families to be safe, their kids to get a good education, and for the kids to do better than they did. And it was evident with all the locals that I did meet. And in this trip, I did get an opportunity, particularly in my last week when I was out on my own, to meet a lot of the locals. And they're just like you and me. I just realized, and I forgot to tell you where Jordan even is. Okay, so Jordan, which is officially called the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, is an Arabic country located smack in the Middle East. It's on the east bank of the Jordan River. From there south is the Dead Sea, and even further south from that is the Red Sea, down at Aqaba. So its western border is basically Israel. Speaking of which, it is one of the Middle Eastern countries that does have official relationships with Israel, so you can go back and forth. It's bordered by Saudi Arabia, which I was close enough to the Saudi border on my second week there that I could see the signs to the border. So it's got Saudi Arabia to the south, Israel and the Palestinian West Bank to the west, Iraq to the northeast, and Syria to the north. And on the U.S. State Department travel warnings, the only area they tell you to avoid is don't go anywhere near the Iraq and Syrian borders just because of the conflicts up there. But throughout the rest of the country, that's just normal. Your biggest fear is the traffic. So whoever you have driving, you want to make sure you have a nice, safe driver because that's the scariest thing. Because like I said before, the lines don't really mean anything. If there's 3 cars in 2 lanes, the 3 of them will just wind their way down the road in the 3 lanes. And you just learn that they know. If they honk, they're telling you that they're coming in, you better move. And the local people know what to do. So we never had any close calls. Just in the beginning, it was a little bit unnerving. But after a while, I was like, they've got this figured out. That I never saw fender benders. I never saw an accident. And they've just got their way of driving. It's just not our way of driving. But it seems to be working for them. After 2 days of hiking in Wadi Rum, it was time to head out to Petra. But we didn't leave just on foot or with an ATV. Although you could have taken the ATV if you wanted to. We left via camel. So, yep. Back on a camel. I was on one in Morocco. You may have seen that if you got my newsletter. You saw my lovely photo of me playing Bedouin woman. This time, I let Frank use my Bedouin scarf, and so we got him all dolled up. So he trekked out on camel with the rest of us, rocking that Lawrence of Arabia look. Camels are so cute. They have these beautiful, beautiful long lashes to keep the sand out of their eyes. And also because they're kind of clunky, they have a really weird and disjointed way that they have to bend down and get on the ground so that you can mount and dismount. So that was always the most exciting part of the camel ride, was getting up and then getting back down. So now it's time for Petra. Petra, which you probably recognize from Raiders of the Lost Ark, is carvings in the side of the mountain that are so intricate and so large, and this is hundreds and hundreds of years later, and they still stand. These were old tombs. The one that's referred to as the treasury is believed to be the tomb of a former Nabatean king. The Nabateans were the folks that settled in this area back during the Silk Road days, and this was their capital at one time, and they just were fabulous carvers. They were great at collecting the water, so in the desert that was super important. And so the Petra area was the main commerce center for people that were traveling through on the Silk Road. And so they carved on the side of this mountain this humongous building structure. And inside, you can't go inside, you can only see it from the outside, presumably was the body of the king. And since the local Bedouin people believed treasures were in there, that's how it got the name the treasury. So this capital is we're talking like the 4th century BC. This whole area has been inhabited for about 7,000 years. The Romans came in later, did their little part, so you can see some of their aqueducts and all that, and you'll see some of the Roman ruins in the area. So it's just an amazing historical area, but it's also extraordinarily beautiful. To get to the city of Petra, you take this, it's not even a mile-long walk through this gorge called the Seek, and you've got this, it's a slot canyon. So this massive walls on both sides of you that you can just barely see a little bit in the front, and as you're walking down, you turn a little turn, and then there is the treasury, and you're like, oh my God, it is so big. And when you open up and then you see this open area, it's huge, and it is breathtaking. So the carvings of this mountain, this is at like a rose-colored sandstone. So it's got this otherworldly color about it too that makes it cool. And that's also what gives Petra its nickname, the Rose City. Not for the flower, but for the color of the sandstone. You can get your picture taken on a camel in front of it. We were lucky enough on our trip because we were actually camping in Petra. They don't allow a lot of people to do that, but this company got one of the few permits that's allowed to do that. So even on the next day, so we saw the treasury on the first day. Another important carving out there is called the monastery, but it's a lot further away, so most tourists don't even make it down that far because they can't walk that far. We were hiking outside of the Petra area and came in from the back. So when we got to the monastery, no one hardly was there at all. So that's one of the few photos I have of me in front of one of these structures with no other people around. That was great. I want to tell you another funny story too. I don't know why it just cracks me up. So there's a little area that you can get some tea and sit out and look at it. So we go up to get a drink. And my favorite is, like I said, I don't do the tea all the time because it'll keep me up. But I was partial to the pomegranate juice. I see this group. They had just gotten their drinks, and they're at the tourist area, so they're a little bit more expensive there, probably $4 or something. So this group sits down to enjoy their drinks and overlooking the monastery. And the seats and the tables are really low, so it's barely even knee high. And they put their drinks down. So while they're sitting there, up comes this gray wolf-like dog. And you'll see a lot of stray animals, usually cats, but this happened to be a dog. The dog's nose stands at perfect table height, looks at them, looks at the drinks, and just does this snorty sneeze all over their drinks. And I swear, every time I think of it, it still cracks me up. I know that's childish, but their look of horror, confusion, and finally laughter was priceless. It was so funny. And just their face looking up, there's no way they're going to drink this drink with that dog snot all over it. It was so funny. It was one honker of a wet sneeze. And anytime I need to laugh, all I have to do is think of that dog and that sneeze. It was, yes, I know it's childish, but it was funny. My eyes are tearing up just telling you the story because I swear it just cracks me up every single time I think of it. It's like the dog did it on purpose. It's still, you can hear my voice right now. It was hysterical to me. But anyway, I got to drink my pomegranate juice and look out over the monastery and enjoy some side hikes from there as well. So Petra, when you go there, you want to try to stay at least 2 days because the typical tourists are going to stay in the town. They're going to take a bus there. They all tend to get there at the same time. So it's all really crowded because they get like 1 million visitors a year. It's the number one tourist attraction in Jordan. So if possible, you want to hook up so that you can camp outside. That was great. Or else you want to try to get there as early as possible because it is crowded. And do take the time to go down to see the monastery. That was wonderful as well. On the way back to camp that day, we took us, like I said, you need to have a guide when you get out in the desert because everything kind of looks the same, even though each cropping is different. It would be really easy to get lost. And so we head back through this dry bed that just from cascading debris up against some of the walls and alleys of the bed looked subject to flash floods when it rained. You would see evidence of previous flash floods where debris was just piled up into a corner against the walls. And remember how I told you the donkeys were my favorite? And I forgot to tell you, too, that if you can't walk, you can take the donkeys in and out of Petra, for a fee, of course. I love the donkeys. You'll see them carrying people. You'll see them carrying goods. The donkeys are a huge mode of transportation for the Jordanians, particularly in the countryside. And they always had these really pretty blankets that were woven with cool patterns. And the weavings in Jordan were quite good. In fact, I want to tell you that the crafts in the stalls, the quality was much better in Jordan than I saw in other countries. And it was noticeable. I could see it in the clothing, in the windows, as well as in the crafts. So even though I don't have room to buy a lot of tourist trinkets and stuff, I noticed that there was a quality difference there. And so I see in where it must have been like a flash flood or something, a little scrap of a donkey blanket. Of course, it's covered in donkey poo and God knows what. And I was like, oh, I want that. And everybody's like, ew, that's disgusting. So I just picked it up. It's maybe 2 foot by a foot. And I was like, no, I love this. And so I stuck it in my trash can bag because it was kind of gross and waited till I got back so I could wash it. And then I washed it thoroughly when I got home. But I love that. It now, freshly laundered, of course, rests on top of my toilet bowl tank, and I love it. It gives me a smile every day when I see it. So, Sean, I know you looked at me with horror when I stuck that in my zip bag, but that is one of my treasures from my trip. I actually get more pleasure from that than I do at the fancy mosaic table I bought. It makes me smile every single time. It makes me think of those cute donkeys and my trip to Jordan. So, anyway, I digress. So, Petra, you want to take at least 2 days if you can. Most tours are only going to let you go there for 1 day. So that was another reason I like Explore. And that's why Margaret picked Explore, because she wanted 2 days in Petra. And I think you really do need the 2 days to really get the full flavor of it. Take some of the little side trails. One of the little sidewalks I went to is up where they used to do sacrifices. It's like 500 steps up. And that was worth it just for the views. If you try to do Petra in 1 day, you're pretty much going down to the treasury and back. So I love the way that we did it. And we got to be in areas away from the tourists. That was great. And another funny thing on the way back. So we're in this canyon near where I found the donkey blanket. And I see this writing on the sides of the rock. And so I'm thinking it's going to be something sacred and profound. And so I asked the lead, what does that mean? And he laughs. He said, it says, Muhammad was here. So graffiti is everywhere, even in the sacred sites of Jordan. Also on the way back to camp, we had noticed it in the morning. It looked like some kind of a road that was on the sides of the roads were lined with tires, and we didn't really know what it was. On the way back, we see it was horse racing. The tires were outlining a horse track, and we're out in the middle of nowhere. So at the end of the day after work, the locals would come out and race their horses. That was kind of fun to watch, and that was a little bit different. I loved our dinner that night. It was one of their classic dishes. I think they called it manasaf, and it's a lamb dish with rice and almonds and yogurt. It's the Bedouin's company dish or special dish, and it's quite the presentation when they turn it upside down. And every night we had something really special, and it was always so good. So I really, really enjoyed the food in Jordan as well. And I want to talk a little bit about sitting around the campfire too. The pita bread is common with every meal, and they prepare it really interesting out in the desert. So like I said, we always had our traditional mint tea. That was nice. I could drink that up until lunchtime. After that, it would keep me up at night. But it was very, very satisfying. So I can see why they do drink the mint tea. Sometimes it'd be sage tea. It's delicious. With every single meal, every time we took a rest break, we had tea. But to properly prepare our pitas, we'd take the untoasted one, and then we were shown how to put them right on the coals of the fire till they crisp up a little bit, and that was kind of sweet. The food was always excellent. There was always plenty of food. It was always really tasty, and there was enough variety that you could always find something to eat. Once we finished with Wadi Rum and Petra, it was on to the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea, if you're not familiar, that is the lowest elevation on land on the planet. It sits at over 1,400 feet below sea level. And the water in the Dead Sea is 32% salt. And because of that, that makes it inhabitable for plants and animals, so that's why it's dead. Nothing can live in there. And because of those high salt levels, you actually float. You can't swim because it just bobs you like a cork to the top. So that's kind of fun. So when we get there, you have a choice. You can just go in the Dead Sea to swim, or you can go over and get the mud. And so everybody in our group, so I was with Hazel, Sean, Frank, and Felicity. And so we decide we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the mud scrub. So you could either have the guys there, I'm in my bathing suit. I'm in a modest one piece. But I thought it was interesting that the guys could put the mud on the girls. I kept finding errors in my preconceived notions of what the Middle East was going to be about. I was expecting to see everything really prudish, not that putting mud on somebody with a bathing suit is risque. I was just not expecting that men would be allowed to do that to a woman in a Muslim country. So I found a lot of little surprises like that throughout my journey. Even when I was in Morocco, when I do the Morocco, I'll explain the story better then, but I was dancing around the campfire with the Muslim men, and I didn't know that, I was like, is it right that I was trying to teach them one of my dances where you're touching the person? And he's like, oh yeah, no problem, and I just thought that was different. I'll tell you a little bit too about the birthday party I would do. I had an image in my head of how things were going to be, and it wasn't like that at all. I only had to wear a head covering if I was going into a mosque or a church or something like that to show respect. But for the most part, if you're a tourist and you're not Muslim, you don't need to cover your head. And the choice of covering your head is the choice of the women. Many women choose to, I found, because they prefer the modesty, but it's not enforced that they must do it. And in fact, at the birthday party I went to, the mom chose to be uncovered, even though the daughters chose to be covered. So it was a personal choice that the women are allowed to make for themselves. And I asked Ahmad about, how come everybody wears black? Where a lot of them do it. In the cities, you'll see more colors, but for the most part, people wear black. And he told me it's because they believe it makes the women more alluring, not to hide them, but it was to show them off more, to show off their faces more. And so I had some preconceived notions about the Middle East and Jordan that I found to be completely wrong. And that's one of the things I love about traveling, because it opens your eyes to different ways of seeing things, to different ways of doing things. And it also teaches you that maybe your way is not always the right way or the only way to do something. Speaking of the ladies in their dress and the black garb, I want to tell you a funny story. I believe this was the last night we were in Petra. They had to go to town to get some supplies and said, anybody want to go to town and do something? So some of us opted to get a hammam, and hammam is a Turkish bath, which I'd never done that before. And so sure, I wanted to try that. So you go in and they usher you to the male locker room or the female locker room, give you a towel, give you some sandals, and you're to undress, and then go into the steam room. And this steam room has got different temperatures depending on how close you are to the jets, but super, super hot. And so you would move around as you try to keep your body from getting fried, and you would go in and out of the steam room. And here's another thing I found surprising. The men and the women could share the steam room. So here we are naked outside of a towel. I just found that just not what I was expecting at all. Actually, I can't remember if it was a towel or a bathing suit, but regardless, there's a lot of skin exposed. So after your pores are thoroughly opened up, in comes the man in charge, and he directs me to the slab to lie down to get just a little bit more steam. So I got fried a little bit more into this other steam thing. Then he comes and says, are you ready? I was like, oh yeah, I'm ready. I mean, I was really hot. So I go into the room, and now I've got two ladies that are going to give me this bath. And so they take off the towel, and so I am standing there stark naked in front of these ladies, and then they start to scrub me. And they use this black soapy scrub stuff, and they just rub me down. And when I get massages a lot, but you're always covered in your private parts. There's no covering here. I mean, and now I'm getting scrubbed. My boobs are getting scrubbed. Everything's getting scrubbed. And so once I'm thoroughly scrubbed down, then they take bowls of this warm water and they just kind of slosh it all over you to get rid of the soapy water, the soapy scrub stuff. And then they put me up on the massage table. And I didn't mention to you that these women are in the black coverings. It's like I said, I don't know what, I should have asked what the name of it is, but it's their attire that looks like a burqa, but without the burqa head cover on it. So they don't have scars on their heads, as I recall, but they have the full long sleeve, flowy, like a caftan outfit on. And there is water everywhere. I just can't imagine what their bodies must have felt like. At the end of the day, they had to be like prunes under there. There's no way they could get dry. So anyhow, so I get my massage, which that was underwhelming because it was a very pansy kind of a massage. And so I happened to get out the same time Sean was. So while we're out in the lobby drinking our tea, Sean tells me his was really intense. I was like, man, I wish I'd had the guys do it because I like a really deep tissue massage. And mine was just like a feather light, why bother kind of a thing. And if you go there, I do encourage you to do the Hammam. It's fun. So let's get back to the Dead Sea. So Hazel and I mud each other up rather than having the guys do it because we didn't want to wait in the line for that anyway. And so I've got a photo of us on the website that's hysterical because all you see are our shoes and my blonde hair. Hazel has dark hair. So we look like two dark things in front of the water. That's just ridiculous. Human Cheshire cats. So after we're all mudded up, then you let it dry. Because that way, I guess it's letting the minerals soak in. And then once it's all dry, then you go into the Dead Sea and you just float around until it kind of comes off or until the sun gets you a little bit. And it was just a nice, relaxing getaway from there. That was really cool. And as I mentioned before, in the Dead Sea, it's really hard to swim because you are bobbing like a cork. So you're basically floating and moving your body around a little bit. It's really kind of fun. I've never been to Salt Lake City, so I've never had that experience before, and I really enjoyed it. And I want to tell you too, if you happen to have the time, like I went back down to this area once I was off the tour, there's some national parks just south and near the Dead Sea. Take the time to hire a guide and go hiking in them. The cliffs, everything is just beautiful. You know, I had this picture of the Middle East just being flat desert. It's not. They've got mountains. They've got beautiful, beautiful scenery in certain parts of it. Not the whole place. And a lot of it is desert. But like I said, if you go on that coastline going from the Dead Sea south, it's striking. I've got a photo that's just gaga that you got to look at on the website, which of course is activetraveladventures.com/Jordan. And on the photo that I posted, you can actually see how the Dead Sea is evaporating because you'll see this crustation of salt at the base of the water. So if you do have the time, take a couple extra days to go down to that area. It really is quite beautiful. And speaking of the Dead Sea and the fact that it's disappearing, it's evaporating, I mentioned earlier that the Jordanians are trying to be facilitators of peace in the area. They also have a stable government and appear to be a relatively well-managed country. They're trying to address the Dead Sea problem. And so what they want to do, both to help save the Dead Sea, but also to foster relationships between the Israelis and the Palestinians, is they're working on an initiative called Red to Dead. They're going to do a canal from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea to help bring water to the seas so they don't lose this magnificent landscape. And in doing so, they hope to also foster relationships between the Palestinians and the Israelis in this project. Because remember, Israel and the Palestinian territory is on the other side of the sea. So I hope they can make progress on this initiative. And next up, we go to Mount Nebo. And Mount Nebo is where Moses first sees the Promised Land. Also from this point, you can look out over the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. So there's tons of historical and religious significance to this area. So Mount Nebo is a super high ridge. It's over 2,000 feet, over 700 meters high. So it gives you a great panoramic view. In fact, and when we were there, we could see that something was going on because they started like a caravan of fancy vehicles came in. Turned out to be a motorcade. And we were kind of ushered aside. We weren't allowed to leave until this caravan came through. It turns out it was President Bush. And so I thought it was cool. They didn't even clear out the area of the tourists when the president came. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so it's a nice place just to go see and look around and all that. That was one of the few touristy kinds of things that we did. Most of the time we were hiking. And then we also went to the town of Jerash that's known for its mosaics. And that was kind of nice. That was too like a little touristy thing to kind of finish up our trip. And so when the rest of the group goes off, now I have got another week on my own. And so I arranged a couple of Airbnb experience tours. And that's the first time on this trip I've used those Airbnb experiences. I got to tell you, I really like those because on each case, I hired a local person as they would make up their own little group and did their own tour or do whatever it is. We took cooking classes that way. I did some walking tours. So in Amman, I signed up for 2 walking tours. The first one was with the D tour with Diana for the D. And hers was just like a neighborhood tour to take you into some of the residential areas and some of the favorite places that locals like to go to. And so I found that interesting. And so on this tour, the other couple that was on the tour had to leave early. So then it was just she and she was going to take me to a traditional Jordanian luncheon place. But when she found out I'd already had that meal, she said, "Oh, let me take you instead, if you don't mind." She wanted to take me to a traditional Bedouin restaurant. And she was pleasantly surprised to find out that I'd already had that manasaf, that famous lamb yogurt rice dish and with almonds that I already mentioned to you about. So then when she found out that I had not had the special dessert, which is I think she called it a Ghana. It's like a caramelized sugar with some cheese in it, and it's just delicious. The line was out to the street to get it, and she insisted I had to try this on her nickel, which I thought was really sweet as well. The locals really want you to know and love their country the way that they do, and I felt it with everyone that I met. And the other tour I did was with Anas on the Alternative Downtown Tour, and I thoroughly enjoyed this as well. He shows you the contrast between the rich and the poor, and a lot of the poor are Palestinian refugees and some of the old refugee camps and all that. We even went up and looked at that and met some of the local people that their families have been there like forever as they try to resolve what to do with this Palestinian situation. And I think he told me 60% of Jordanians are Palestinian, of Palestinian descent. Anyhow, so that was a fascinating tour. And so with Anas, I turned out to be the only person that signed up for the tour that night. So we're walking around and all that, and he's showing me the different things. It was fascinating, and it was nice to have the one-on-one where I could just ask whatever questions I wanted to. And I found both he and Diana very forthcoming about no matter what I asked, what was it like for a girl to go dating? How did you meet the guys? All kinds of things I was able to ask them, and they were most helpful. And so anyway, Anas gets a phone call, and I can hear he's trying to plan something for after the tour. And so I just casually asked, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh, it's my mom's birthday." So we're trying to, figure out the birthday cake and all that. I said, "Anas, I could come on your tour any other night this week. Go visit your mother on her birthday. You don't need to be with me." And he said, "Well, let me just show you a couple things, and why don't you come to the party with me?" And I said, "Well, that would be great. I mean, how often?" It's like being invited to go to my friend Jamie's Scottish birthday party. It's like, how often do you get to go to a birthday party with a bunch of Jordanians? So, of course, I jumped at the chance. And so after his brother secures the present and the cake, he comes and picks us up. And don't go get all worried about me getting in a car with a strange man, in fact, 2 strange men, because A, I'd gotten to know Anas over the last couple of hours and felt completely comfortable with him, and B, the car is loaded with the children. There's nothing's going to happen to me. And Mom lived quite a ways away. It probably was about a 30-minute drive outside of the city. So we get to the apartment, and I thought it was really funny. So between the 2 buildings, he had 40 cousins. He's like, that's why I had to move out, because I could never get any of my work done because there's always kids or chaos or something, because all the family lived right there, in and out of each other's houses and apartments and all that. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because traditionally the man would not move out of the house until he did marry. So what Anas was doing was very unconventional. So we got everything set up for the party. We've got the cake, the decorations, the party food. And I could see across the alleyway 2 of his younger cousins were sitting in the window, which fortunately did have a little the cage bar around it. So one of my favorite things I saw are these kids just with their legs dangling through the cage watching the birthday party until somebody felt sorry for them, went and got the kids so they'd come join the party. So just picture just tons of kids and people and chaos and singing and dancing. And yes, they were singing and dancing, even though music is forbidden in the Muslim world. Everybody knows all the songs and everybody was having a great time. Hugging the mom as I was leaving. The mom said I now had a Jordanian family. I even got an invite to come visit next time I'm in Jordan. It was really sweet, and I was honored to be a part of it. So those are 2 of my favorite independent things I did. And then also I asked to lead our guide on the tour, could he arrange for some other activities, because there's distances between everything, and it's hard to coordinate the logistics sometimes when you're traveling by yourself. He arranged for me to have a driver that would pick me up each day and to take me some points of interest for some of the touristy things. I also went to a national park to do some hiking, where they also arranged for a private guide to take me into some beautiful, beautiful countryside. Like I said, the landscape is so varied that you might be out in the desert highway, and yes, it is desert, and then you take a turn and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the mountains. So really cool on that. And you can see Jordan in about a week. I think if you have the time, you want to go 2 weeks because then you can go more in depth. So plan on at least a week and preferably 2 when you go to Jordan. And on my hike in the national park, my guide made a really nice lunch for me that I wanted to share that with you because it makes a great hiking dish or backpacking dish. So he took a super thin tortilla and then he covered it with olive oil, sprinkled it with thyme, sesame seeds, and goat cheese. Yum, yum, yum. All rolled up. Oh my gosh, it was delicious. So in the city of Amman, I got an Airbnb, and I tell you what, it was nice. I'm right next door to the Italian embassy, as I'm in a super safe neighborhood. That's usually how I pick a place. I look for the neighborhood first. I try to find out what are the best neighborhoods to stay in for my style. I don't like the real fancy. I just want safe and cute, or maybe like the not edgy, that's not the right word. It's something like the Soho neighborhood or something like that. Something that's got a little quirkiness to it, that has been gentrified usually. I guess the word I'm looking for is hip, even though I'm the furthest thing from hip. And then from there, I look at the price ranges, and then I find a reasonably priced one. And from there, then I always look to find somebody that's got lots of reviews, so I don't have any of the bad instances that sometimes you read about in the news. So anyway, so I get this apartment. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. I get the place all to myself. I didn't see another soul in the apartment the whole time I was there. And so they had this rooftop terrace that was my absolute favorite. So I'd go up there at sundown each night, and I was able to get a bottle of wine. I will tell you about that in just a minute. But I could get up there and listen not only to the call to prayer, which they do the call to prayer, I believe 5 times a day. And it's one of my favorite things. I just like the pausing to check in with yourself, check in with your God, and just take a breath. In fact, in the background, you'll hear a recording I made of the call to prayer that is going on simultaneously with the church bells. I apologize for the wind blowing that you can hear in the mic, but anyhow, it was just a very special time for me, so you'll hear that in the background as I continue with this next segment. I hope you enjoy it. So I'm really drawn to the call to prayer as a time to pause, reflect, give thanks. Although I'd never, outside of a few times, saw somebody actually stopping what they're doing to go do it, I would always pause during the call to prayer and just be quiet and within myself at that time. So on the sunset one, it was particularly nice because you could see the sun going down. I was on top of the city, and not just the call to prayer, it was also the church bells were also ringing because they were very open about you can believe whatever you want. And so you would hear the church bells clanging and the call to prayer. And it was just one of my favorite memories of Jordan. And so I made sure to do that every single evening. And I don't know if it's sacrilege, but I did it with a glass of wine. So let's talk about alcohol. Okay, so in the Muslim religion, alcohol is forbidden. Most do not drink. Some do. And they just say they know that they're not supposed to, but they do anyway. And I always thought it was funny because if it's illegal, how come they have liquor stores? But they do. They're not very common, but they're out there. Usually for some reason they have an Amstel, not Amstel Light, but an Amstel green sign out front. I was like, there it is. And you could ask anybody and they could tell you where it was. And, each neighborhood usually had one. So I found that because it's illegal and frowned upon, it's very heavily taxed. So the beers were expensive. And the wine was expensive, but I found the wine cheaper than the beer, so for the most part, I just drank wine. So I could go down and I could get actually a pretty decent bottle of wine for like $12 or so, which is reasonable for America, but when you look at the prices of what I paid for meals in my apartment, that was expensive for Jordan. Like I said, I had that great lunch for like $5. My apartment was very nominal, and I'm in a really, really nice apartment with that gorgeous skyline terrace in a outstanding neighborhood. So relatively speaking, it was expensive compared to Jordanian cost because Jordan is a fairly inexpensive country. So anyway, I could get a bottle of wine, and there was no problem if anybody came up and I was drinking wine. I asked the guy that was managing my apartment. He said, no problem. People do it all the time. I said, okay. So I didn't worry about having a glass of wine up there and watching the sunset. So that's the story of alcohol there and my probably forbidden mix of alcohol and the call to prayer. I hope I wasn't being sacrilegious because it sure felt like a sacred time to me. On a lighter note, here's a cultural difference between what I'm used to and Jordan. While they have Google Maps, nobody uses it. They don't use addresses either. It's all landmarks. This makes for an exciting time trying to find things, particularly if your cab driver has no idea where you're going, and you don't either. So I want you to picture Amman. It's very steep on both sides of the main drag, and so you'll have these switchback roads that zigzag up to the mountaintops as you get further and further away from the city center. And so what looks like it might only be a half a mile to you when you're looking at your Google map with a bird's eye view, you don't realize that you're going up, say, 1,000-foot elevation gain. And so it might be, 5 miles of road. It's really hard for you to tell. So I wanted to go, I forget what I wanted to see, a museum or something like that. And so I decided to take a cab. That was funny because he couldn't speak English. I can't speak Arabic, and he doesn't use Google Maps. And neither one of us have a clue as to where I'm going. And they don't seem to use addresses. It's all about landmarks. Oh, it's this over by the Toledo Hotel. It's catty corner across from there. Or it's just one block from the Hamish restaurant or whatever it was called. And so I could tell on my phone that I was getting really close to the place I wanted to go to, but we just couldn't get there because the roads were either one way or we'd get to where we wanted to get closer and it would zig back the other direction again. And so finally, I just said, forget it. I just paid him. I said, I'll just get out. I can figure it out from here because I figured it had to be easier for me to walk than it was for us to keep zigzagging up this mountaintop. And it turns out that between the different levels of the roads, because remember, you got to zigzag up the mountain, you'd find these stairwells that the locals could use so they could walk it rather because you don't want to walk back and forth. It might be, 100 steps up, but it saves you 2 miles of walking, for example. So I had one encounter where I just couldn't find the steps. Most of the times, I'd walk a little ways and I could find some way to go in the direction I wanted to go to. And so one of the few times I ever had to pantomime, I go into this one newspaper stand and I didn't know, of course, I don't know how to say stairs in Arabic. So I just used my arms and I just kind of propelled them up to indicate stairs. And I saw the light bulb go off. He's like, oh, yeah. And he points me in the right direction. And I was very proud of myself when I made it back to, I was still staying at the Toledo Hotel then, made it back there because they were holding my bags until I was able to get into my Airbnb. But anyway, so that was kind of funny about the fact that they just don't use Google Maps. I hope that next time I go there that they will because it's got to save them a ton of time. But anyway, I found it a humorous story. So when I get back to the hotel, I decide it's probably a good idea since I'm moving to an Airbnb and I have to leave at 5:30 in the morning later in the week when I'm departing, that I'm going to have the hotel arrange for a driver to pick me up because the area I'm going to is residential. There's not going to be taxis going around in the morning, particularly that time of the morning. And this way I want to be really sure that I've got somebody to get me to the airport so I don't miss my flight. So I explain to the man, I write it down, Friday, this time, this address, blah, blah, blah. And because, like I said, addresses are a little bit iffy there, he even has the driver come out and find the place later that day just to make sure that we're all on board of where I'm going to get picked up. So I thought that was great. I was like, all right, I got this down. I've got my driver. And so he assures me everything's okay. We agree on a price. And so everything's good. The next day I wake up and when I turn on my phone, I see that I have all these texts at 5:30 in the morning saying that the driver's outside waiting for me. I was like, oh no, they got the date all wrong. I couldn't understand. I said Friday. I wrote Friday. How come he's coming here on Tuesday or whatever the case was? And that made me nervous. I was like, I called them. I said, no, just cancel that. I'll make my own arrangements. So I had talked to the gentleman that was running my Airbnb, Fadi. Super sweet. Every time I walked into the building, big smile, like I was the greatest thing that ever happened walking into the thing. Just lovely people. And frankly, Fadi's the only person I ever saw in the building. It was just he and I all the time. I don't know who else was in this big apartment building. So anyway, so he agrees to take me to the airport. And so every time I saw him, I was like, Friday, it's 5:30. Yes, Friday, 5:30. I'll be there. Turns out he spent Thursday night sleeping on the rooftop terrace to make sure that he was there on time for me. And I can't emphasize enough how helpful and friendly everybody was to me in Jordan. Just super sweet. Zidane, my driver, Literally, he would have taken a bullet for me. And he was so sweet and always impeccably dressed, very formal, and couldn't do enough to make sure I was happy. Was this the right this? Is this the right temperature? Is this the right place to go? Is this whatever I wanted? He could not have been more accommodating. Just lovely, lovely people. Jamal, my guide in the national park. Just a lovely young man. I can't emphasize enough just the kindness of the people and how welcomed I felt. And at no time did I ever feel unsafe, with the possible exception of getting used to the driving in Jordan. And mind you, that was only in the cities. When you're out on the desert highway, it's not an issue there. It's mainly in the congested when there's lots and lots of cars battling for a very small amount of real estate. And welcome to Jordan, welcome to Jordan. That was the recant I would hear constantly from everyone I encountered. And one thing I really appreciated is while I would certainly be invited to come check out their shop, I never was pressured. I was never hounded. Some places you go to, it's really unnerving because you're just getting constantly barraged to come in, buy something. And I never got that pressure in Jordan at all. People were just welcoming, friendly, inviting, but there was absolutely no pressure. And I really, really appreciated that about the Jordanese people. Each country that I go to and each trip that I take, I usually adopt at least one new habit of the locals and add that into my life because it not only brings back fond memories, but it's usually because of something I truly enjoyed. So a couple things from Jordan I really liked is they would have a lemonade with mint that was delicious. I'm going to add more cardamom to my diet. I bought these delicious preserves of quince and cardamom that was just outstanding. In fact, I'd like to learn how to make that. I want to add mint and sage teas to my diet, preferably in the afternoon. Maybe I'll try to find some decaf tea that I could add the herbs to. In fact, my tea habit changed the first time around when I went to Tanzania and I had the cloves and the cinnamon in it, which I added to my tea with ginger. So now I have the best morning tea ever. So now I'd like to add in the Jordanian tea with either the mint or the sage. I could never drink the Turkish coffee. It is so strong and so thick. Like the bottom third of it is just like mud. And I mean, it would put hair on your chest. So that was something I was never able to adapt to. Although a lot of my travel mates would drink it no problem. If I drank a cup of that, I'd still be awake. I want to talk too about what to wear. In Muslim countries, modesty is a virtue. And so this is not the place to be wearing your tank tops. This is not the place to be showing cleavage. You should be wearing long sleeve shirts and cover your elbows. The women should not be showing their knees. I, both for sun protection and also to respect the local culture, was always in a long sleeve shirt and long pants. And that was just fine. I did bring a hijab, a headscarf. I only wore it throughout my Middle Eastern journey when I was in a mosque or in a church, and the rest of the time it was just in my bag. If you choose to dress more provocatively, it's going to create some unwanted attention and it's going to signal to locals that you might be easy. One of the women that I traveled with in Egypt was wearing close-fitted t-shirts and short sleeves. She also had the complexion that made her look like she could be local, which I think added to the fact that the men thought that she was a local who was just dressing risque. And so she got some unwanted attention. Nothing bad happened to her, but she didn't like the people staring at her and talking to her and all that in ways that she felt was disrespectful. And I was like, well, why don't you just dress like I do? Granted, I'm 20 years older than her, but I never had any of those issues whatsoever. And you could say all you want, oh, you should be able to wear whatever you want. Well, to me, when you're in another country, you should respect the customs of that country. And if you're not willing to, then maybe that is not the right country to go to. There's plenty of countries to go to. So that's my 2 cents on that. I had no problems doing that. In fact, like I said, for the sun, I like to keep the sun off me. Even if I'm hiking in North Carolina, I'm in long sleeves and long pants because I want to keep the sun off my skin to try to protect my skin. When I look back on my trip to Jordan, my favorite memories are always the donkeys. I love those little donkeys. They're just so cute. I especially enjoyed hiking in Wadi Rum and our little camel trek. That was a blast. Of course, Petra is something to be seen, but I actually liked Wadi Rum better. I loved being in the Bedouin camps, But if I had to pick the number one thing I love the most, it's the Jordanian people. They're wonderful. They're warm, hospitable, friendly, fun-loving. You can't beat it. And apparently they're pranksters too. I had a little incident on my checking out before we started our tour that day. So I'm going to check out and he asked for my papers. I'm like, my papers? What are you talking about? He said, you were given some papers when you arrived yesterday. Where are your papers? I'm like, I don't know. I look on my passport. I can't find them anywhere. He said, you're not going to be able to leave the country unless you find your papers. I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember they gave me something. I'm frantically looking and I can't find my papers. And after he makes me sweat a little bit, he starts laughing. He said, here are your papers. You gave them to me by accident yesterday. I was like, oh, so when you get your papers, make sure you put them in your passport so you don't lose them because they will not let you leave the country unless you have your papers. This is the same man that arranged for my driver that showed up on the wrong day, but I'm pretty sure that was an honest mistake and not a prank. He apologized profusely for the driver misunderstanding. And certainly one of my fondest memories is the call to prayer. I find it haunting, I find it beautiful, and I came to really, really appreciate that, even though I don't share their faith. My biggest takeaway from my trip in the Middle East is that we get a lot of bad junk in the news that does not represent the people. The governments might be fighting with each other, but the people are just like you and me, and in fact, they're friendlier than you and me. So I hope, if nothing else, whether you go to Jordan or not, that you do have an open mind when it comes to the Middle East, because I truly do think that we are getting only a very small part of the story when we hear about the Middle East. Is there a chance of terrorism? Yes. In fact, the place where President Bush was, they did have an incident a couple weeks after I was there. But we have incidences here in the United States all the time now. So having a bad thing happen is become a fact of life no matter where we travel or even where we live. Would I travel to the Syrian border? No. When it comes to safety, I look at the State Department guidelines, but I also found in Israel that a lot of that is so conservative that, yes, read that, but then ask the locals. They know, and they don't want you to get hurt. They'll tell you whether or not it's safe to go somewhere or not. When I go do my Israel episode, I went into some areas that the State Department said, don't go, and it was fine. So, and the people, like I said, the people know. So I went with the advice of the locals over the State Department on a couple of instances in Israel. I mean, they're offering tours at the hostel I'm staying at. How dangerous could it be? They don't want their guests getting hurt, and they know they're on the ground. They know what to do. They know where it's safe and where it's not safe to go. In the State Department briefing, it'll have this big, broad area, but the tour companies know the safe sectors of town or regions, etc. Within that broad area, that might be perfectly fine. So while I certainly can't advise to ignore the State Department guidelines, just realize they can't pinpoint every single different neighborhood. So there is a broad brushstroke instead of fine-tuning some of those recommendations. And I'm having a feeling that's the same thing in Mexico too, and I'm going to be investigating that as well. So I hope that this episode has opened your eyes. A wonderful and fascinating region of the world that's being neglected by tourists, and a region I believe unfairly maligned in many ways. It was a wonderful trip. I would highly encourage you to do it. If you do it, do the camping. That was so fun, and that was so nice to be away from the tourists. And because you're spending the whole day and the evening and the meals and all that with your guides and with your Bedouin, the Bedouins are the ones that run the camps. So you get to know them and get to ask them questions. They become your friend. I had a footwear malfunction in Israel when I was in some gloppy bog that peeled away my hiking sole from my shoe. And so here I'm hiking in the desert. The front part by the toes had peeled away, and so all the sand was coming in and liable to cause a blister. And so, but he was worried about me. So what did I have? Oh, the one day we were doing a touristy thing, he went and he got my shoes resoled and fixed, and I don't know, they put some tar or something on them, but those shoes are still working fine today because he was worried about me. He wanted to make sure that I had a great time, and these people would take a bullet for you. I hope you've enjoyed learning about my adventures in Jordan, And I'd like to hear from you. Please email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and let me know, did this show change your mind a little bit about traveling to Jordan or to the Middle East? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!